Welcome back to Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room. We are going to continue reading Greenlight by sereneMusafir. We're on Chapter 5, so let's get started. It is my firm belief that when strong emotions, such as lust, anger, despair, and love, are bound by unifying fundamental impulse, love can turn to hate as efficiently as anger can turn into lust. All that is required is the precise provocation and circumstances to elicit the first response. After all, the love for another requires the same degree of hatred that is felt at the thought of ever being without them. Safiya Al-Jabbar, 1915. Hermione wakes up before dawn fans out across the night, her body no longer throbbing from the ache of yesterday. They'll be traveling today, and she's determined to get her hand on Safiya's diary, and maybe even some of her own ministry work, considering they'll be on the road for hours. She takes a moment on her balcony to breathe in the early morning air and the whistling of the birds in the courtyard. She soaks in the serenity of the dawn and the exhilarating feeling of being awake while others sleep. Stretching her arms above her head, she spares a curious glance towards Malfoy's room. The balcony door is closed and the lights are off. She chews at the corner of her lips, gazing at the quietness that radiates off his darkened room. But then a dimmed light flickers out from the cracks between the curtains, and Hermione slips back inside. As she showers, she thinks about the residual anger she has about last night's conversation. She doesn't hate Draco Malfoy, especially not at the level Harry and Ron, who have personal vendetta that they can't seem to bypass regardless of Malfoy's conviction and the years that have passed, since Harry and Ron have always been under the impression that the Wizengamot trials that followed the end of the war weren't fair, and that the Death Eaters got off too easily, despite the majority of them getting the kiss. Hermione herself was angry about a lot of things that happened during the war, the choices she had to make as a child, and the things that were indefinitely snatched away from her. But she no longer had the energy or the time to think about what went wrong or whether the trials were fair. Everything is limited in her life, including the days and the hours spent on individuals who play no significant role. For her own sanity, she has to believe that the law was fair and that the law was in favor of the victims. She simply can't afford to be angry with the people who've been tried for their actions and suffered the consequences accordingly, Malfoy included. She hated him once, a time before that seems like just yesterday and yet a lifetime away. She can't remember the boiling anger she'd feel in her veins when she'd see Malfoy pick on Harry or Ron. She understood then that the fights Malfoy initiated were reflections of a school rivalry and juvenile bullying, rooted in the insecurity that he felt in the shadows of Harry Potter and his best friend Ron Weasley. But it was his attitude towards her that she didn't understand, couldn't comprehend how someone could feel the level of hatred that he felt towards her for simply existing. So she returned his hatred with an equal push of her own, simmered in the emotion, and let it be the foundation for how she viewed everyone who sided with Voldemort. Until the night at the manor, until she saw something that she's not sure might have even been there, but was enough of a catalyst for her own reevaluation after the war, how she viewed the boy she once despised. So no, she didn't hate Malfoy. She just doesn't know enough about who he is and what his beliefs are now after the war. All she has on Malfoy is the Prophet's coverage of his whereabouts and gossip from unreliable sources that go to his parties, consume the free drinks and entertainment, and then proceed to talk trash the next day. Despite how badly she wants to pull Malfoy to a corner and ask him what his deal is, she rationalizes that, of course, Malfoy wouldn't want her to be here. She herself was shaken when she saw him in the courtyard. In fact, one of the reasons why she even came was because no one would know who she was, and it's obvious that Malfoy was under the same impression. They're not friends, and frankly, they don't have to be to survive the next month or so together. She can treat him in the same manner she would treat a coworker, who also just so happens to stare at her while perhaps thinking of all the ways she has inconvenienced his life. By the time Hermione wrangles her hair, which she expects will go back to its uncontrolled, unruly mess the moment she leaves the room, she decides she's going to be the bigger person and lets the conversation go, which thankfully isn't a novel idea when it comes to Malfoy, and is a lot easier for her to accomplish. She's in a considerably good mood when she sits down for breakfast, even going as far as passing the water jug to Malfoy when he asks Tony for it. He responds by scowling at her hair before turning away from her entirely, ignoring the water. Hermione pointedly ignores him, passes a jug to someone else, and reaches for an orange. We'll be traveling the majority of the time in vehicles, Amina explains during breakfast, serving a tea. Hermione eagerly fills her own cup for the second time around. Magic works, of course, so keep your wands closed. Replacements and wands repairing will be difficult based on where we are during the trip. Because of the uncertainty around apparition due to weather turbulence and some anti-apparition walls set to establish borders, apparition can be tricky, as there is a great risk of splinching, so we'll divide into groups and take the vehicles. Hermione can't help but glance at Malfoy to gauge how he feels about this new revelation, but he's already glaring at her, arms crossed against his chest as if expecting her to do so. She rolls her eyes, a reflex that her body apparently has yet to unlearn despite her pledge, and it makes him narrow his eyes further. What about port keys? We have a location we've been designated based on previous expeditions in case of emergencies, Amina says. They're only one way, so you'll have to be attentive to that. Amina pulls out a map, pushing dishes aside, and unfolds it across from her as everyone simultaneously leans forward. Hermione's at a weird angle, unable to make out the location name. She reaches towards the map so that she can adjust it to face slightly towards her, but before her fingers even graze against the edge, Malfoy stops her, placing his own hand tightly on the corner of the map, jaw clenched and eyes fixated on the map. She scowls at him, but swallows her protest and inhales deeply, attempting to look happily unbothered. Amina points where they are and then explains the trip's route that will take them mostly through Morocco and into the desert. The closest city that opens up to the desert doesn't have a landing pad, making flying into it difficult, and so they will have to drive to the desert with the local guides in their crew. The route in the desert is uncharted, as they will primarily be following Sophia's expedition reports, and so they'll have to be careful about the trek there. They finish breakfast, and the group breaks out to carry out last-minute things before their departure in the afternoon. Amina mentions that she needs to visit the Gemma Elfin, a large marketplace located in Merhek's old city, for a quick visit to pick up an artifact from the trip. Hidden behind stalls are restaurants in the wizarding part of the where Amina needs to meet an acquaintance. It's a notable portal of businesses and passageway for wizards and witches traveling through North Africa, and Hermione asks if she can go along with her, hoping to catch a glimpse. Although she wishes she could explore the city more, this might be the only opportunity for her to discover parts of the city and maybe get some gifts for her friends back home as a way to make up for not being there for the statue reveal. Upon Amina's agreement, she runs to grab her bag before meeting her outside. It's when she sees Amina talking to Malfoy outside that she hesitates. She didn't know he was coming as well. Excellent. Everyone's here. Amina waves her over. Children, grab onto my arm if you please. There's a moment of confused fumbling where Malfoy grabs the nook of Amina's arm at the same time Hermione does. Her hand slaps on top of his, and he sends her such an offended look at the contact that Hermione wants to just grip his fingers tighter and crack a few knuckles. You're freezing, he sees, which is true because Hermione's hands are always cold, even when she's sweltering everywhere else. And you're sweating, she snaps back. Of course, isn't true because despite wearing all black and it being 30 degrees outside, his hands are pleasantly warm. The kind of warmth that makes her want to wrap his long fingers around hers so she can melt away, one ice chip at a time. Malfoy takes his other hand, grabs her wrist, and forcefully plies her hands off of his. Hermione hisses, perhaps a little exaggeratedly, at how tightly his fingers dig into her skin. She glares at him as she yanks her arm out of his hold. As much as I am fascinated by what is happening here, Amina interrupts, looking at them with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment, we have to get going. Hermione flushes, embarrassed to be caught in such a childish activity with Malfoy, and quickly grips Amina's wrist. She barely has time to tighten her hold when they apparate away together in a dizzying blur of light. She stumbles into a yard wall when her feet catch the ground. She sees black spots, still swaying from apparition. For a second, she has vertigo, and she has to reach out a hand against the wall in front of her to find her balance. And the mode of transportation has become one of her least favorite ways of traveling in the last few years because of how long it takes for her to regain her sense of self. She gets her vision back and finds her fist clutching Malfoy's shirt from behind. In the moment that she takes a breath to upright herself, and he moves away from her touch with such speed, as though she has black cat flu. She realizes he's built like a damn rock. One solid pillar of stone. She automatically catalogs the information away in case she's ever in a fit of rage because of him that requires some serious manhandling. Do not attack Malfoy until hands are secured and protected. He shoots her an annoyed look, glancing down at her hand momentarily, and then disappears into the crowd. Hermione blinks twice, realizing she's left behind, and hurries after him. Immediately, she's faced with a sensory overload, the smells and sounds of the bombarding from every direction. The bustle takes over as flocks of wizards and witches walk down the curling, winding alleys, such as some entering shops, others stopping at stalls to browse, each moving through the labyrinth with determination and purpose. Hermione has a moment of panic when she realizes she's fallen behind, but then she spots a blonde head peek out from above the crowd and scurries through the bodies to get closer. Malfoy looks like he's about to say something to her when Hermione catches up, but then Amina calls them to hurry, and she doesn't spare him a glance as she falls in step behind her. The Wizarding Quarter reminds her of Diagon Alley, except with more vibrant colors, a larger crowd of people speaking different languages, and an endless array of magical shops, promising things she's never seen before, even back home. She passes shops with outdoor stalls of rainbow-colored fresh spices for all kinds of potions and watches in awe as vendors call out to tourists about magical carpets that zoom past her head from one side of the alley to the other. The air is filled with the mouth-watering aroma of spices and argan oil. The walls are covered with stacks of pressed dragon leather slippers and intricate woven robes of various fabrics and colors. Straw baskets and bags are being woven magically by phantom hands into intricate and monogram patterns. Hermione is so distracted by one shop of magical lanterns that she bumps into Amina when she stops to talk to another vendor. Malfoy lets out a surprised grunt when he walks into Hermione, which further pushes her into Amina. "What the fuck, Granger?" he growls, jerking back. "Why aren't you looking where you're going?" It's the most he's spoken to her in such a long time that it takes her a moment to realize that he's actually talking to her. She truly can't remember the last time he said something to her other than her name, not including the glaring through which he obviously tries to communicate all his misery about being around her. He hasn't voluntarily said something first. When Malfoy's face twists to give her a look that suggests perhaps she's finally lost it, Hermione finally regains her thoughts. She opens her mouth to retort back, to ask what exactly he was focused on if he didn't see her stop, but then Amina comes up behind them. "I'm going to be here for a moment, so you two can take a look around. Just come back here at the exact hour." Before Hermione can protest about being left alone with Malfoy, Amina escapes into a hidden shop. She turns to Malfoy slowly and matches his disdain with her own. "I need to look for gifts," she says promptly, and starts down the alley before he can oppose. There, with hundreds of shops, so really there's no need for them to be together at all. But the way she feels the urgency behind the two holes that burn into the back of her head, she knows she's close behind. So she ignores him and continues to look around. She passes a crowd around what looks like a fortune teller, donned in a turban and an elaborate emerald gown ruffled with peacock feathers. The witch goes on to talk about revealing lies of lovers and future disasters, and Hermione quickens her pace to the next stall when she accidentally catches her eye. It's considerably difficult for Hermione to navigate the crowd, and she finds herself spewing a series of apologies as she bumps into those around her. She can practically feel the fury that radiates off Malfoy, so much so that when she stumbles the fourth time after being pushed by the crowd into a stall, she expects him to combust there and then in the middle of the way. But instead, when she glances at him after straightening herself and quickly putting the things that she's dropped Back, the anger is directed less towards her and more towards the moving crowd. The annoyed, inconvenienced looks that he sends her away as she sputters apologies to the vendor. Makes up for it, though. For the rest of the walk down the alley, she feels his arm hovering against her left side, as if to physically restrain her from walking into the crowd's skin. She knows it's more of an unconscious act on his end, and while she wants to tell him that she can most definitely walk on her own, she lets him do it only to convince herself that she's tired of embarrassing herself in front of him. She stops at a stall in front of a less packed souvenir shop near the quiet corner of an alley. She looks back to see if Malfoy is following her, but he seems to be engaged in a conversation with a vendor next door, selling herbs and spices. She can't help but gape when she realizes that they're not speaking English. She recognizes a word or two in French, only because before coming here, she tried brushing up her French from the one summer where her parents had insisted they all learn before a trip to Paris. Malfoy's fluency in the language isn't shocking, considering his aristocratic upbringing, but the ease at which the two men are talking. Malfoy nodding earnestly every beat or so, and the man laughing when Malfoy says something. The wizard grasps Malfoy's hand as if to commemorate some kind of deal. She's tempted to stand and listen to their entire conversation, but forces herself to twist away and scan the trinkets at display. Hermione goes around buying little gifts, packets of lavender-flavored infusa tea she knows Luna will love, herbs to help with muscle aches for Ginny, and continues to look around the shops for Harry and Ron. She's so engrossed by everything around her and the different displays that she doesn't realize how far she's traveled until she reaches a stall selling wooden artifacts. There are wood boxes that Hermione picks up, one that's just larger than her hand. She tries opening it up, but the lid doesn't budge. The old witch behind the display gives her a toothy grin and motions to try again. She looks back at the box quizzically. She tries to solve it like an arithmetic problem. She turns it in her hands, trying to fill the edges and the side, but it doesn't give. She takes her wand out, but the woman stops her. She says something indecipherable, using her hands to gesture not to use the wand, and sits back to watch. Hermione understands and goes back to the box. She tries again, pressing the pads of her fingers gently across the sides, turning to find any changes in the texture. There's a slight depression in the make of the wood at the bottom, and she presses it, and the lid pops open, and a second door slides out automatically from the other side. She looks at the woman eagerly, grinning. The woman nods her head, clapping. She leans over, smiling, and whispers as if it's the greatest secret in the world. La magie. She holds up a finger to stop Hermione from going anywhere and reaches into a bag behind the display. She brings out a wooden circle the size of a coin on a leather string. Hermione brushes her thumb across the imprint at the center of a necklace, the sun with 7 rays carved out by a crescent moon. She hasn't brought anything for herself, but something about the necklace calls out to a place deep in her chest. She takes out a coin pouch to pay the witch, but the witch shakes her head. Hermione reaches over to hold the woman's hand, squeezes once, and puts the money in her palm. Please. The woman nods reluctantly and starts packing the necklace. She takes the bag and says her thanks before turning around to return to the shop where Amina had left her. Hermione pauses when she realizes she doesn't know where she turned last and pushes through the crowd to find an empty spot on the side of the alley. She arches to her toes and tries to find a head of white, but the crowd is moving too fast, blurring into a single mass of color. She groans to herself, knowing Malfoy is going to give her an earful when she finally finds him, and pushes off the wall and turns into an alley close by. It's the wrong thing to do, and she feels it immediately. The heaviness of the dark arch shrouds Hermione, and alarm bells ring at the familiarity. She quickly turns back to leave, but is faced with a brick wall where she entered. She silently curses herself for putting her guard down and takes a deep breath before twisting to face the alley. It's quieter from the main part. Exchanges being made in hushed whispers between hunched bodies covered in dark robes scattered across the alley. She sticks out like a sore thumb, and she can feel eyes that follow her every movement as she slowly walks down the narrow alley. There are no signs in the shops, no vendors calling out to her to come and visit their displays. Windows are darkened, making it difficult to peer inside and see what's being sold. It's clearly not meant for tourists, and Hermione can't figure out if she came across the alley by accident or if it opened up to her purposefully. She catches the eye of an elderly witch and takes a step towards her, hoping she's as friendly as the one Hermione met before. But the woman grumbles something under her breath and slips inside her shop. The door slams shut behind her. Hermione sighs, head hanging. "You look lost." She turns towards the dark female voice. There's a body in a black corset dress standing at the entrance of a shop behind her. The woman's face is hidden in the shadows, but Hermione can make out gold bangles stacked on each wrist. They clang against each other as the witch takes a step forward into the light. She's young, her bronze skin's illuminating despite the darkness. Her long raven hair glides around her like silk with each movement that she makes towards Hermione. "Would you like some help?" the witch mummers. Sultry eyes, lined in black, gaze at Hermione. "You need only ask." Hermione hesitates as the witch walks slowly up to her, her dress swishing around like water against rocks. "I think I took a wrong turn. I just need to get back to the main road." The witch hums absently as she slowly circles Hermione. She stiffens when the witch's fingers brush against her shoulder, leaving goosebumps in their shadows. "But there's something else, isn't there?" Her voice is soft behind Hermione's. "Something grander in your past that's clouding your mind, stopping you from opening your eyes to what's in front of you." Hermione wants to roll her eyes, understanding exactly what's happening. The witch isn't dressed in her costume as the fortune teller she'd seen in the main, but one look at Hermione had her coming out at the opportunity of swindling her. If she wasn't in such a dire need of direction, Hermione wouldn't even have bothered explaining herself and left. "I'm not sure I understand," she says, voice firm but polite. "I just need to go back." "It was right there, but then the wall." "I can help you open your eyes." The witch clasps a cold hand around Hermione's left wrist and flattens her fingers to gaze into her palm. "That's all right. I assure you there's really no need to do that." She tries to gently tug her hand out of the hold, but the witch's grip is a vice. Annoyance bubbles in Hermione's chest as she physically twists her mouth shut from saying something rude and reminding herself she's still very much lost. She glances around, but the alley is now empty. The witch gazes into Hermione's palm, her fingers following the lines contemplatively. She hums to herself, eyes flashing, as though the nondescript swirls of Hermione's palms are personally telling her something. Hermione wants to yank her arm away and tell the witch that there's no way she's paying for any of this. She was never one to tolerate divination. Couldn't get past the flimsiness and insubstantiability behind the magical study. Too much of the method was based on sheer luck, and luck couldn't truly be measured or studied. Her distaste only deepened when Trelawney noted her lack of aptitude for magic, making it the one branch of magic Hermione couldn't simply learn through books. "You're looking for something," the witch mummers, a voice low and distant as if in a trance. This time, knowing the witch can't see her, Hermione allows herself to roll her eyes. A vague castaway line perfectly suitable for all kinds of tourists. Of course she was looking for something. Hermione watches her warily, the witch's breath tickling the palm of her hand. The witch looks up, her eyes blown wide in a bottomless pit, and despite her resistance, Hermione finds herself sinking into them. "What you seek is not what you will find." Her persistent voice reverberates through Hermione's bones. "Yet, what you once sought, but lost once more, can be found, if only tried." The witch searches her face, and Hermione is unable to turn away, frozen in the reverie of the witch's words. Her body is weighed down by the witch's eyes. She feels a burning pain before she realizes that the witch is tracing the cursed words on her arm. "Why do you hide?" she whispers to Hermione, her fingers digging deep into the scar. "When your demons are the same." Hermione hisses at the stinging under her skin, eyes wide and panic gripping her by the throat. She yanks herself away, clutching her arm to her chest protectively. The witch only studies her, face blank, eyes contemplative. Terror bleeds into her veins at the memory, and her shoulders tremble as she struggles to breathe. Hermione doesn't look back as she runs down the alley, away from the direction she originally came from. It means nothing. 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 Empty words. Meaningless. She lets out a cry of relief when she hears the normal, loud bustle and runs towards it. There's an exit between two walls, and she gasps when she realizes she's back to the main location, where she'd first entered the dark alley. She turns to face the dark alley, but it's soundlessly sealed shut behind her. Her heart still beats against her chest, and she's trying to calm herself from the reminder of her scar when a hand grabs the other arm and whirls her around. Malfoy is furious. "What the hell, Malfoy?" Hermione tugs her arm out of his hold. It doesn't hurt, but she's still taken aback by the witch and her words that it's a defensive reaction to rub where he grabbed her. "Where the fuck have you been?" His eyes draw to her arm where she's still rubbing it, and he immediately takes a step back, flexing the hand he touched her with. "I've been looking for you." He's angry, but there's something else. He's flustered, she realizes. His hair is pushed roughly away from his face as if he's been running his hand through for the past half hour, his chest heaving as hard as his breaths. She looks at him confused, hoping to mask the relief she feels at seeing him. "Why?" "Why?" he echoes incredulously and runs a single hand down his face impatiently. "Do you even know where you are?" She scowls at him and pushes past to walk down the alley, making sure to stay close to the edge of the crowd. She's not sure where she's going, but it must be the right way because he doesn't correct her. "I'm not an infant, Malfoy. I didn't ask you to come and find me." "You should have at least waited for me or told me that you'd left," he snaps, voice hard, as he follows closely behind. "I was looking for you like a fucking fool." "I don't need to tell you anything, Malfoy." She turns to him, grateful for the annoyance that replaces the uneasiness that's left from her encounter with the witch. "I don't owe you anything." He glares at her, eyes jumping from her eyes to her hair and down to her lips. He opens his mouth to say something, but thinks twice and shuts it closed. He looks over Hermione's shoulder. "Where did you two run off to?" Amina says, coming between them. "We need to get going or we'll be late." She holds out her arm and they both grip it, pointedly far from each other. She operates them. This time Malfoy steps aside before Hermione can use him as leverage. She loses her balance and stumbles, grasping air. He leaves her there and stalks towards the entrance. She can feel the blood pounding in her ear. She's unnerved, and anger is a familiar feeling she can hold on to steady herself. She tried, really, to be the bigger person. That was the whole point. Granted, she hardly lasted a full day, but she refuses to put in effort when he clearly isn't going to give her the same courtesy. She hears the words come out of her mouth before she can even think to leave it alone or ignore him, remind herself of a solid pillar of stone. "What the hell is your problem, Malfoy?" It comes out a shrill, even to her own ears. She's lucky they're the only ones outside. Malfoy stops. She can see his shoulders tense, the pause before he slowly turns around to face her. He stares at her, waiting. If he surprised her at her outburst, he doesn't show it. "Why wasn't I on your list?" She doesn't know why. This is the thing that she brings up first. His eyes flash, but he straightens himself immediately, shoulders back, spine rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know about the list." She takes a step closer to him, and Malfoy schools his face into a blank slate. "You purposely excluded me from your list of who can't come. And don't say you didn't, because you literally included anyone, everyone who may know you, except me. So you were originally okay with me coming, but now you have a problem with me, and I want to know why." "I know this may come as a shock to you, Granger," he drawls, "but not everyone is thinking about you often enough to have a problem." "What are you even—" "Like I said, shocking. I know how much you love being under the spotlight and being memorialized with fucking statues, but believe me, you do not have this much of an importance in my life." Her jaw drops. "You're the one who's always on the front page every weekend with your over-the-top and all-around excessive party. Stalk me, do you, Granger?" He smirks. "Hardly," she scoffs, pushing her hair over her shoulders away to do something with her hands. "The fact that you know about the statues means you're the one stalking me. Besides, it's difficult to ignore the obnoxious photos of the manor. Honestly, if I had known how obsessed you were, it's so typically narcissistic of you to assume that everyone is just fascinated by you. I can send you a personal invite if it stops you from bombarding my ears with your shrill please." She clamps down her hand on his arms to stop him from talking as he jolts under her touch with such intensity that she drops it right away. She doesn't care that she's practically begging Malfoy. She's desperate enough to grovel a little if it means she doesn't have to go back home. Don't take this away from me, Malfoy. I need this. There's a final pause between them, and she excels, gathering control. So the lion has decided to finally come out of the den, he sneers, looking away from the spot on his arm she touched, and down at her. I thought we lost you there, Granger. How do you even know about the list? He lifts a slender blonde brow. Were you snooping, Granger? Hermione bites the inside of her lip and looks away. He nods, smirking. A typical weasel habit, being where they're not supposed to be. Or a ferret's. She's giving him a withering glare. He ignores her. Of course, those around that family would acquire ill-mannered habits as such. A contagious disease of unsavory actions, exacerbated surely by the sheer size of the family. Leave Ron and his family out of this, she grits her teeth. She should leave, drop the topic, gather whatever semblance of her pride that's left. Or she could point out his hypocrisy, considering how rude he's been this whole time, but she's more annoyed that she's even feeling this flustered and defensive. It's so juvenile of them, but she can't seem to stop herself from taking the hand he's giving her. It's as though they've forgotten that they are professional adults and have instead settled back into their teenage habits at Hogwarts, as if nothing has changed. Harry, then? Malfoy crosses his arm and raises his brow. I remember a particularly broken nose as a punishment for listening to things he shouldn't have been listening to. Are you going to punish me then, Malfoy? The words escape her before she can even stop herself. Silence takes over the space between them, but then she takes a step closer, and she's frozen to where she's standing. This close to him, she can smell him. Amber and sandalwood with this sweeter undertone, vanilla, she thinks. He tilts a head low so that their eyes are at the same level, through his blonde fringe. Hermione swallows hard, and his eyes flick to her throat at the movement before snapping back to her face. She watches the corner of his lips tug slightly upwards, amusement dancing in his silver eyes. His head dips even lower, and she feels his warm breath against her cheek. She shivers despite the heat, and she knows he knows, because there's a smile in his voice when he speaks quietly. If you ask nicely, Granger, anything. If she's honest, she has no clue what they're talking about anymore, because all she can think is how close he is to her face. The heat of his breath, the brush of his hair against her temple when he moves back to straighten. She has to blink furiously to remember what's happening, where they're standing. Malfoy jerks as if he's just remembered too, and takes 2 steps back. He scowls once at her hair, and then, as though nothing has happened at all, he turns around and walks inside. Hermione wraps everything up in her room and joins the rest of the group outside the hotel for departure. Malfoy is nowhere in sight, and she sighs in relief when Amina assigns her to the jeep with Lena and 2 other men, filling the remainder of the seats. Tony asks to join her, but Amina tells him that she needs him to go over the maps and get rest stops with her. Having buckled all her luggage on top of the jeep, Hermione waits in the car alone. Amina walks over and sets a plastic bag onto Hermione's lap through the open window. She gives Amina a puzzled look and peeks inside. There are a dozen oranges, but also a familiar diary. She takes out a replica and looks at Amina with wide eyes. There are 2 copies. We were only authorized to have 1, but I managed to pull some strings for our resident scholar, Amina explains. I know how badly you want to rip into the pages, so this one is yours until the end of the trip. Hermione returns a smile, grateful. She's been meaning to get started on that first few entries. Thank you, Amina, really. Amina shrugs, and as everyone quickly clambers into the car. If there's anyone who can make sense of the diary, it's you. Amina knocks her hand against the side of the jeep twice and then makes her way to her own vehicle. As the jeep spurts into action, Hermione notices a blonde head walking around another vehicle. Malfoy pauses at the open door, and his eyes snap up to hers. She holds her breath, remembering the words he whispered in her ear. But the moment is gone, and she gets in just as quickly, the door slamming shut. Why do you hide when your demons are the same? Hermione turns back in her seat, facing forward, and gripping her left arm with her right hand until her knuckles turn white. The driver honks twice to signal the movement, and they're off. And that was chapter 5. We'll see you in chapter 6. Have a good day.